Young Adult Romance, presented by Alyson, Durham, and Debby Verba. Young love, so fresh, so new. When teens fall in love, they somehow get transported into the adult world. Most teenagers experience romance for the first time during their young adult lives. Very strong feelings occur as a result of physical and hormonal changes, as well as emotional maturity. Extreme happiness is due in part to serotonin, and both sexes experience changes in their testosterone levels. With all of the physical and emotional changes going on in a teenager's body, it is no wonder why this group has intense emotions in the area of romance. And there is something special in reading literature about first love. How romance has been portrayed in young adult literature has dramatically changed over the years. Romance has been a main theme for young adult stories. However, we need to know a little history in order to understand how romance in young adult novels has grown. Also important is to know that the category of a teenager did not always exist. It was not until World War II that the term young adult became common. In 1900, there were just two groups, children and adults. Only about 11% of teens between the ages of 14 to 17 were enrolled in school. There was just too much work to do for teenagers to experience what young adulthood could mean. They quickly went from being kids to working adults. Because of what was going on in society, literature was not specifically aimed for the adolescent. Between 1900 to 1940, talk began about the value of aiming books toward a new category of people. The American Library Association began its Young People's Reading Roundtable in 1930, compiling a list for young readers, now known as young adults. Finally, in 1948, librarians came to terms that the older, younger readers no longer wanted to read children's books. Their book list and its suggested titles was officially changed to adult books for young people. The modern era of adolescent stories began 12 years prior when publishers read a story that was not a kid's book because the content was mature, yet it was too easy of a read for adults. They decided to publish Sue Barton's Student Nurse. The book was still popular 11 years after its publication. The series ended with Sue marrying the doctor that was introduced to her in Book 1. 1942 signaled the era of writing for teens, in large part due to 17th Summer by Maureen Daly. This story about a teenage summer romance has sold more than 1.5 million copies and is still being sold today. Romance literature officially took off thanks to the success of 17th Summer. 40 years later, Going on 16 by Betty Kavanaugh was published and was similar to its predecessor in that they had elements of dating and popularity. Also popular, like Kavanaugh, was Rosamond du Jardin, who was practically 17, and besides sharing a word in the title, had other similarities to Daly's book, including, of course, young love. Through the 1950s to 1960s, the idea of dating and how it was shown in romantic books differed from today's teenage stories. Back then, the romance novels portrayed teens doing as much as holding hands or attending dances only after the third date. The 1970s began the explosion of the adult romance, which made an influence into YA books. Reading these types of novels was a way for teenagers to escape. The 60s and 70s produced works that did not involve sex in the relationships, but did allow some kissing and yearning. Judy Blume's Forever and Nancy Garden's Annie on My Mind opened the door for romances to involve sex in them. The 80s sold stereotypical storylines depicting the main goal for girls is to attract boys. Romance series sold millions and included titles such as Sweet Dreams, Young Love, and First Love. There were 34 million copies of Sweet Valley High books alone. The 80s and 90s produced series romance, which became a literature bonanza for publishers. A big difference between the 1940s books and 1970s, aside from content, is the fact that teens were the first time sought-after consumers. The romance series ironically inspired late 80s and early 90s horror genres such as the Goosebumps series. Just like the romance books, these were also written with a formula in mind. Today, Harper Teen exists to continue the romance literature need by including works that have some sort of romantic tie. Publishers now get through to technology-driven teens by way of blogs and websites. Even in our modern times, the worry that parents will complain about a teen romance book will always exist. However, librarians must stay on track to find books that teens desire to read for fun.
There are too many young adult romance authors for us to talk about all of them, so here are 4 of the most well-known and best-loved authors in the genre. Jenny Han is a well-known contemporary YA romance author. Her first YA book, The Summer I Turned Pretty, and the following 2 books in the series were national bestsellers. This trilogy chronicles the love, loss, and betrayal of Belly Conklin during her summer from childhood into adulthood, and she and her mom share a beach house with her mom's best friends and her 2 sons. Jenny Han's latest book, To All the Boys I've Loved Before and P.S. I Still Love You, follows 16-year-old Laura Jean as she deals with the fallout of every private letter she's ever written to a crush or an ex-boyfriend getting mailed out. This series was originally written as a duology, but Jenny Han recently announced she was expanding it into a trilogy. The final book is set to release in the spring of 2017. In addition to YA romance, Jenny Han has written 2 children's books and co-authored a contemporary YA series focused on revenge rather than love. Here's Jenny Han in a short author interview talking about writing YA.
I started writing my first book when I was in college, and so really I was only a couple of years out of being a teenager myself when I started that book, so it didn't really feel like I was making a choice per se, but I'd always loved books and movies and just like media about young people. I think for the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy, that was initially going to be 1 book, and then I wanted to do like a bunch of summers in one girl's life to show her as she moved through adolescence. And as I started writing it, I think I was only maybe about 30 pages in when I realized there was no way I was going to be able to do everything I wanted to do in 1 book. So I really wanted to show her from a young age up through, young adulthood. I don't really take into account crowd requests, because I think then you feel like you're sort of like crowdsourcing your book. You know what I mean? And like you have to listen to yourself and follow the path that you want to take. You know, I think especially when you write a series, it can be really difficult because you start book 1, that comes out, and you're working on book 2, and people are like, oh, I want this to happen, I want that to happen, and you really have to quiet those voices because I think you have to answer to yourself first and make sure you tell the story that you set out to tell. Well, I'll say first, Siobhan and I are best friends and really love each other, and we're just like buddies, and so we read each other's work, we write together, we just have so much fun together, and we help each other with our own stories. And so I think the biggest difference I would say is kind of like when you babysit your friend's kid, and like your niece or your nephew or someone that's not your kid, and you love the kid, but you're not gonna like discipline the kid, not really, you know what I mean? But it would be like, that's their kid, so they have to decide how they want to like deal with mischief. And so when she gives me notes or when I give her notes on her stuff or vice versa, there's a sort of, we want to help fulfill their vision, you know what I mean? And you want to help with that, but you're not trying to direct what they do. You just want to help them complete their goal. So when it's the 2 of us working on it together, then we're just both in it equally, and it's like our shared baby that we can both yell at or discipline as we see fit.
These read-alikes will give out plenty of Han personality. Love and Other Foreign Words captures Han's humor and sass. You can practically see Han in the book, first and then. It is a mix of power with loveliness and very engaging as well. And To All the Boys I've Loved Before can easily be compared to The Start of Me and You because of the high school scenes and loving families. Also noteworthy are My Life Next Door, On the Fence, Finding Audrey, Breathe Annie Breathe, and The Revenge Playbook.
Sarah Dessen is another contemporary romance author who published her first YA novel in 1996. Sarah is very prolific, having published 12 books in 20 years. Her books focus on relationships both romantic and familial, and how they change under pressure from loss and tragedy. 7 of her novels have been selected for the ALA's Best Fiction for Young Adults, including That Summer, Someone Like You, Keeping the Moon, Dreamland, This Lullaby, Just Listen, and Along for the Ride. In 2003, the film How to Deal was based on Dessen's first 2 books, That Summer and Someone Like You. In a speech at the 2011 National Book Festival, Sarah Dessen spoke about becoming a YA author.
Of 88, which I know a lot of you weren't born yet, but don't tell me that because that always gets me really depressed. But there were people on either sides of me that were all crying and they were all nostalgic and they were like, 88 forever, we'll never forget. And I was just like, ugh, get me out of here, you know? I'm never going to think about any of you ever again. So, but the ultimate irony is that I spend half of my day every day thinking about high school. So clearly there was a lot more material there than I anticipated. I did write my first novel not realizing it was young adult. It had a 15-year-old narrator. I was just out of a college writing program where I had been encouraged to be very literary. And so when I finally got an agent interested and she said, well, this is young adult, I said, oh, no, I'm a serious writer. You know, little did I know. I was a serious writer. I was also a waitress. But she said, just trust me. And she sold it to a children's book publisher. And that's how I became a young adult writer. And it is the best thing that has ever happened to me, because those of you who write for teens or know teens who read know that it is just the most enthusiastic audience you could ever find. And the reason is that they are just connecting with books. They are just finding something of themselves on the page. I think what often happens with older readers like myself, if we like a book, we're like, yay, this book's really good, and pass it around to my friends, whereas the girls that read teen books and love them like shriek and jump up and down and put online reviews with 1,000,000 exclamation points and burst into tears at signings. And you know, my husband was on tour with me a couple of years ago, and this girl started crying in the signing line because she was so, I know it's not about me, it's about the books, and I just sort of represent the books. But my husband was so just rattled by this girl crying over me, and he was just like patting her on the shoulder. He's like, she's nothing special, trust me. If you only knew, you know, she doesn't wash the dishes right. She doesn't, you know, she always leaves things in the sink, kind of thing. But anyway, I feel very, very fortunate, and young adult has changed so much since my first book came out in 1996, when literally there was no teen readers section. All young adult books were grouped with children's picture books, so it would be like my book, and then Curious George, and then, you know, and I didn't blame teenagers for not wanting to come into that section. And as YA has gotten more popular and grown, and then we had Harry Potter, then we had Twilight, I mean, I think everybody else is finally in on this great secret that I've known for a long time, that teenage readers are the best. They just are. And it's hard not to get a little proprietary when all these adult authors are suddenly coming in. It's like, hey, those are my people. But no, the more the merrier. I think anything that gets people to read is a wonderful thing.
The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han is also a Sarah Dessen read-alike. You will notice that Trailblazing Forever by Judy Blume made it on this list. Other than the one-syllable titles of Bloom, Eggs, and Squashed, some of the other suggested titles such as So Be It, How to Build a House, The Story of Us, and Emily and Oliver are worthy reads.
Rainbow Rowell only started publishing books in the last 5 years, after a long career as a newspaper columnist. After writing one adult romance novel, Rainbow wrote 2 YA romances back-to-back in 2013, Eleanor and Park and Fangirl. Both were listed among the best young adult fiction of 2013 by the New York Times. Eleanor and Park was also listed on Amazon's top 10 best books of 2013 and awarded Goodreads Best Young Adult Fiction of the Year. Eleanor and Park is the story of 2 misfit, star-crossed 16-year-olds, smart enough to know that first love almost never lasts, but brave and desperate enough to try. In this author interview, Rainbow talks about fan fiction and the importance of love and story.
So after the Harry Potter movies, I walked out of, after the books, I was okay. I was like, it's okay, there'll be movies. There are gonna be movies, there'll be like 10 movies for each book, it's gonna be fine, I don't have to say goodbye. But I walked out of the last Deathly Hallows movie and just thought, it's over. And I started reading fan fiction that very night.
Wow.
Yeah, I like Googled it.
You were like a junkie looking for a fix.
It was exactly right, that's exactly right. Well, I think for a lot of people in traditional publishing, so I mean, I've encountered that when I started writing the book with people saying you can't write about fan fiction, that's plagiarism, and also I think dirty. So
someone told me.
It's mostly women writing and reading fan fiction on the internet. It's a lot of teenage girls. And anything teenage girls do to express their romantic or even sexual feelings is automatically awful and shameful and something that shouldn't be talked about.
But that's a new phenomenon, right?
No.
You've said that if there's not a love story, it's not real life. Like
right,
that's not a story, right?
Yeah, right. So the best Star Wars movie is Empire Strikes Back. It is.
Right. And we agree on that.
We all agree on that.
We agree on that.
Because we're not monsters. And I would say a big component of that is the Han Leia love story, because the idea that romance cheapens a story, romance doesn't cheapen life. You know, do you know people in your life and you think, oh, that person has never known love, he's a finer, more intellectual being? No, that is a part of our life. Finding someone, it's perhaps not it. Perhaps some of us feel this need or drive more than others, but love and romantic love is fundamental to who we are. So, yeah, I think it's a huge part of story. This book.
In her books, Rainbow makes a point of addressing the realities of teen romance, including both emotional and physical intimacy.
Comparisons can be made with these books in the writing and thematic styles of Rainbow Rowell. The collection of these was originally made from YALSA listings. Like No Other by Una LaMarche can be compared to Rowell's Eleanor and Park. The story is about a good girl and a nerd who meet by chance in an elevator during a hurricane and are stranded. The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson also features a nerd in the story, but this time it is played by the female protagonist. Girl Defective, How to Say Goodbye in Robot, and Fan Art are indeed read-alikes despite the titles insinuating otherwise.
John Green may be one of the best-known YA authors, due in large part to the film adaptations of The Fault in Our Stars and Paper Towns. His first book, Looking for Alaska, won the Michael L. Prince Award from ALA and is a New York Times bestseller for YA paperbacks to this day, although it didn't make it onto the bestseller list until 7 years after publication. John's books all have strong elements of love and romance that tie into the complexity of the characters in the story, and ultimately, life. In addition to his own works, John co-authored Will Grayson with David Levithan, another YA romance author, which was the first novel starring gay characters to appear on the New York Times bestseller list for children's chapter books. John is also famous for the videos and blogs he and his brother Hank create. This blog is John talking about the banning of Looking for Alaska in 2015.
Good morning, Hank. It's Tuesday. So the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom just released its list of the 10 most challenged books of the year in the United States. Challenged meaning someone requested to have the book removed from a school or library. And it turns out the most challenged book of 2015 was Looking for Alaska, which was written by me. The book has been challenged and banned around the country for offensive language and sexually explicit descriptions. I suppose this is a kind of honor. I mean, Looking for Alaska contained the very same offensive language and sexually explicit descriptions subscriptions 10 years ago, but was much less likely to be banned because, not very many people had read it. Also, Looking for Alaska beat out some of my favorite books, like Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan and Funhouse by Alyson Bechdel, and also The Holy Bible, which came in 6th. To be fair, the Bible does contain its fair share of explicit passages. Anyway, I'm often asked to respond to the banning of Looking for Alaska from schools and libraries, so okay. Here is my response. Text is meaningless without context, and what usually happens with Looking for Alaska is that a parent shows one particular page of the novel to an administrator, and then the book gets banned without anyone who objects to it having read more than that one particular page. The scene in question involves a very awkward and ultimately failed attempt at oral sex, which is described in very cold and clinical language. In fact, the entire passage contains only one adjective: nervous. And then, in the book's next scene, two characters have a much more sensually described and passionate, but much less sexually explicit interaction. That passage ends, "We didn't have sex, we never got naked, I never touched her bare breast, and her hands never got lower than my hips. It didn't matter. As she slept, I whispered, 'I love you, Alaska Young.'" So in context, the novel is arguing really in a rather pointed way that emotionally intimate kissing can be a whole lot more fulfilling than emotionally empty oral sex. Teenagers are critically engaged and thoughtful readers. They do not read Looking for Alaska and think, "I should go have some aggressively unerotic oral sex." And they also don't read The Outsiders and think, "I should join a gang," or read Divergent and think, "I should jump onto moving trains." So far as I can tell, that kind of narrow prescriptive reading seems only to happen inside the offices of school superintendents. So yeah, I don't think Looking for Alaska is pornographic, and I don't think its readers find it titillating. But that noted, I don't think it should be up to me whether Looking for Alaska, or actually any book, is in a school or a library, because I am not a teacher or a librarian, the highly trained, criminally underpaid professionals we employ to make those decisions. As I've discussed in the past, I don't think publicly funded learning exists primarily for the benefit of parents, or even primarily for the benefit of students. It exists for the benefit of the social order. We are all better off with a well-informed, well-educated population, because that population is more likely to start successful businesses and develop treatments for cancer and write musicals about treasury secretaries. And that's why everyone pays taxes to fund public schools and libraries, regardless of whether you personally use the library or have kids in school. I think teachers and librarians know more about teaching and librarianship than I do. And I believe they must be allowed to do their jobs serving the whole public. But even beyond that, I don't believe that books, even bad books, corrupt us. Instead, I believe books challenge and interrogate. They give us windows into the lives of others and give us mirrors so that we can better see ourselves. And ultimately, if you have a worldview that can be undone by a novel, let me submit that the problem is not with the novel. Hank, I'll see you on Friday.
Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell made this John Green read-alike list along with some other favorites. Obvious similar themes tie these books together. And please ignore Vera Dietz. Vera is in high school when her best friend, who she has a secret crush on, mysteriously dies. Paper Covers Rock has 16-year-old Alex trying to get in terms with the accidental death of her friend. Another story involving a teen trying to deal with grief is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour. Amy is 16 and takes a trip to the West Coast with Roger, who is in college, and tries to come to terms with her father's death. Although not all of these read-alikes deal with death, the adolescents must learn how to come to terms in some sort of emotional situation.
Picking YA romance titles to highlight that were not written by our featured authors was difficult. But here are 4 books that represent the most recent and/or popular YA romance titles. The Selection by Kiera Cass is the first of a 5-book series. This fantasy romance is set in a dystopian former America where there is a caste system and a monarchy. Here's a publisher-made book trailer to give you the plot.
For 35 girls, the selection is a chance of a lifetime. The chance to be swept up into a world of glittering gowns and jewels. The chance to win Prince Maxon's heart. I didn't think this is what I wanted. I was content where I was. I was in love. But it turns out, the life I always imagined might not compare to the future I never dreamed of.
The main character, America Singer, competes in the selection to help support her family, but will she fall for the prince, or will the love she left behind last? Some key romance elements in this story are competition romance and love triangles. Dreamology by Lucy Keating is a contemporary romance with a fantasy twist. For as long as Alice can remember, she has dreamed of Max. Together, they have traveled the world and fallen deliriously, hopelessly in love. Max is the boy of her dreams, and only her dreams, because he doesn't exist. But when Alice walks into the class on her first day at a new school, there he is. It turns out, though, the real Max is nothing like Dream Max, and getting to know each other in reality isn't as perfect as Alice always hoped. Some key romance elements in this story are a meet-cute and fated love. "99 Days" by Katie Contogo. 99 Days is a contemporary romance set in the town of Silver Lake, where Molly Barlow is facing one long, hot summer. 99 days with the boy whose heart she broke and the boy she broke it for, his brother. Here's a book trailer made by Epic Reads. Some key romance elements in this story are a love triangle and physical intimacy. Anna and the French Kiss is an internationally best-selling contemporary romance and the first in a trilogy. Anna is looking forward to her senior year in Atlanta, where she has a great job, a loyal best friend, and a crush on the verge of becoming more, which is why she is less than thrilled about being shipped off to boarding school in Paris, until she meets Etienne St. Clair. Smart, charming, beautiful, Etienne has it all, including a serious girlfriend. But in the City of Light, wishes have a way of coming true. Will a year of romantic near misses end with their long-awaited French kiss? Some key romance elements in Anna and the French Kiss are infatuation and first love. Romance is an integral part of most young adult novels. There is a lot of crossover between genres, so we compiled some reading lists that highlight romance across other genres. The majority of romance is contemporary, focusing on teens experiencing first love, heartbreak, or true love through the lens of high school or summer camp or other modern circumstances. These stories often feature issues other than romance, like family drama, sexuality, or mental health. Set in the past, historical romances often feature mistaken identity or subterfuge that leads to the development of romantic feelings for a previously disliked or unknown character. Often, young adult historical romance include long courtships because it involves royalty or the aristocracy. Romance is often a driving force in fantasy, sci-fi, and paranormal novels. Love develops between seemingly misfit characters, even between humans and non-humans, like werewolves, vampires, or angels. Other driving forces of romance include magical connection and dystopian circumstances.
We believe that the scope of what is being allowed to be written in teen romance novels today has sure changed from the past. The early novels showed teens holding hands on the third date. Now, modern teen romance stories allow the reader to enter their bedroom and let them see and hear in detail exactly what they are doing. In addition, we feel that the teen romance novels will not go backward, but instead continue forward to whatever new chapter the path young teen love decides to take. Issues may be new and different, yet with a number of talented writers in the young field, teenagers and adults will continue to read YA novels, and writers will not be afraid to reflect how they feel and act. More risks may be taken in the future, as the history of romance writing has shown, as that growth is never ending. Finally, we feel that the desire for publishers to purchase more and more young adult novels will continue.